Thanks very much for the intro, Cameron. You all can hear me, right? Awesome. Good morning to you all. Thank you for dragging yourselves out of bed and away from the bar to make time this morning to see this presentation. Really appreciate you coming out. As Cameron said, my name is Hajighafouri. I'm in the sales team at Avana Software. And we are, a technology company. We have to do a lot of innovation, not just from the products and technology standpoint, but also on process and how we do things like selling and servicing our market. So we've been through a transformative process over the last year or so, and one of the big parts of that was sales training, sales optimization. So in putting this presentation together, I wanted to draw on that experience and bring some of those learnings to you today to share with you some of the things that we have experienced in the course of that process. So just a quick survey of the room. If you could put your hands up and let me know, how many of you have sales or business development in your job title, or that's your role? Okay, so a few hands up, and keep those hands up for me for a second. How many of you are owners or company directors, general managers who really care about the revenue that your salespeople are bringing in? A few more hands. How many of you are just so tired that raising your hand is just not an option at this point? I'm getting that impression a little bit too. So definitely there will be a lot here for you today if you're involved in that realm of your company. But even if you're not directly involved in sales, if you're interacting with your customers, if you're part of the value and the services that you deliver, you'll find something here, I'm sure, today. So, just realized I need something to move these slides forward. So, some of you out there might be thinking, well, business is good right now, markets are booming, we're bringing the money in the door, so why would we need to necessarily think about changing how we sell or how we deliver value to our customers? The thing about it is, when things are going well, that's the best time to look at ways to innovate and improve. And frankly, if that's not something you're doing, somebody else out there certainly is. How many of you were here for the keynote yesterday that Michael gave talking about disruption, the fourth industrial revolution? Yeah. So the technologies and things that emerge out there in the world, that certainly drives change, but also the business dynamics. Starting actually though with a technology change that's impacting how we sell in every industry. Going to do kind of a then and now, a before and after. So back in the day, which could be anywhere from a few years to decades ago, you had to interact with a salesperson to get prices, to get information about products, to find out what you needed to get a job done, whether or not you wanted to actually talk to a salesman. So what's happened with the emergence of the internet and all the information that's out there is that we can now do homework on what we're looking for before we ever engage with a salesperson or a vendor. And in fact, one survey found that in the business-to-business world, 94% of buyers did research on the internet about something before they made their purchase decision, oftentimes before they'd even contacted the vendor to begin with. Have you ever had those calls come in where a customer just says, hey, look, this is what I need, I want a price. I don't want you to ask me questions, I don't want to talk to you about it, just tell me what I'm asking for. That ever happened to you? Chances are that person has gone out, done a lot of research, and they're just looking to get a number, move on to the next competitor to talk to you about the same thing. So as salespeople, we have to ask ourselves, how do we override that assumption on the part of people doing their research online? How do we connect with them, which is something we'll talk about today. Another thing that's shifted in how our customers operate and how we operate for that matter is everyone's always been short on free time. No one's ever been sitting around waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for a salesperson to call them. But the nature of the disruptions and the distractions in our organizations has evolved. So whereas previously it might be meetings, phone calls, mail, that kind of thing, now everybody's carrying a cell phone in their pocket that's constantly going off. Texts, voicemails, phone calls, sports updates and scores. Everything you can imagine, we're inundated with information. So as a salesperson trying to make a connection with a customer and engage with them, first of all, every second you get counts, so find out how to maximize that time that you get with them. But also thinking about how to demonstrate value, how to get their attention despite all that noise, how to get your signal through all the noise they're experiencing. And then a little more specific to the work that we do in our industry, the nature of the, let's say, the competitive market shifts as well. So there have always been competitors. There have always been more contractors than there are contracts available. So there are always competing bids. But there have been further shifts in recent years where, of course, there's always new companies showing up. We have really big industry names merging and creating even bigger, longer industry names. And we have customers beginning to enter the field as well. So you might have turnkey servicers, insulators who used to subcontract scaffolding, now deciding to do it themselves. Owners and operators, EPCs, saying, hey, maybe we can do this in-house as well. So in effect, you start competing with your customer. So how do you differentiate what you do from what they might want to do internally? How do you stand out in that regard? So that's what we're going to talk about today, is some techniques, some things that help you engage with your customers in that way. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this, if you forget everything else I say today, I want you to bear in mind that sales training, investing in your teams, that gets results. Another survey, because I like making you put your hands in the air, sorry, just makes it a little interactive. How many of you have ever had a formal sales training? Not so much bidding and estimating, but actually gone to a training program, read books, that kind of thing. Excellent. So hopefully you got value out of that and you know kind of what I'm talking about. Those of you that haven't done that, or if you work for organizations that don't standardize that, there's a real opportunity there. The opportunity we're talking about in one survey that demonstrated this is that when you engage your sales teams in high quality training, when you really invest in them, you typically see more likelihood that sales reps achieve their quota to the tune of, on average, about 8% on the 2,000 companies that this survey captured. You've got win rates going up, so your odds of winning a contract to begin with improve. Your sales force retention, really important. You invest there's a lot of experiential value in the people you have, of course, investing in them in training and development, helping them be successful. That keeps salespeople on the team. And that's a really important thing. Turnover is a really costly thing. And lastly, attaining revenue plan. So if you're not on the sales team, but you are monitoring revenues and things like that, thinking about bringing training into your organization can be very useful. I should have given this disclaimer first, by the way. I do not sell sales training. So I'm not here trying to pitch you some service. It's very much about what's benefited me and in my experience using training services. So a few resources to share with you. I'll kind of start with that end of things. Books that you might want to look into. The Miller-Hyman Group, which is a sales training organization, they put out a whole series of books, two that are especially useful, Strategic Selling and Conceptual Selling. This covers customer-centric selling. So what that means is putting the customer at the center of what you do in your sales organization. We all like to say the customer is always right, the customer is the focus, but how much do you actually structure your organization, your practices and technique around the customer's needs? And so these books get into that in great detail. Start with Why is somewhat a pseudo-psychological exploration of what motivates people to make a purchase or make a contractual commitment. It's usually not the what of what you do, not the product, but more about their reasons, truly the value that they're looking to derive. We'll talk about that a bit today as well. Influence is a book about the psychology of persuasion, as the title says, very much about what is involved, what happens in our brains when we're in a sales engagement or any kind of real discussion and negotiation. The drivers, the psychological factors that lead us to make decisions and react to things the way we do. And then lastly, the one thing, more of a productivity book than a sales book, but a great process for goal setting, for setting up actions and putting systems in place to actually achieve your goals, which as salespeople, we're very much about that number we've got to get and finding a path to get there. As far as training services, so I mentioned Miller-Hyman that wrote the books. They also do, of course, actual training courses. Great one to look into. That's one that we've used at Avantis. And then Sales Buzz, another one that we've used. That's more of an inside sales, cold calling sort of program. But there's a lot of good gems. It's also a very compressed program. So both these are things you can do very quickly and get a lot of value out of. The last thing I want to mention also as a resource is myself. I like talking about this. I like getting to know what people are doing in their organizations and seeing where I can help, separate from the software and everything that we do, just talking about this. So if this is something that you're interested in, you want to talk about in more detail, come find me. I'm happy to chat about it. So in that mind, a little bit of background about me just briefly, so you know kind of where I'm coming from in this and my experience in sales, both today and in previous roles. My first job right out of high school, my first full-time job, was with the Best Buy Geek Squad, which anyone who knows me, it's probably no surprise that I had geek in my title at one point in my professional life. Supposedly, when I got hired, I was expecting to fix computers. Turned out to be a quota-driven sales job after all. So that began me on my course into a career in sales. So I'd moved into title and escrow and real estate for a little while, spent some time in healthcare IT, training sales teams to present our products and services. And then for the last 7 years, been with Avantis Software, working with you all here. So the reason I share this is I've worked with selling to little old ladies trying to get their computers fixed. They can just get online and look at pictures of their grandkids. I've sold to high-powered corporate executives who are trying to take over the world. And currently my favorite group that I work with is guys who like to get high and hit stuff with hammers for a living. So I was hoping that would play better as far as a scaffold joke, but thank you for the pity laugh out there. So I've worked with all sorts of different groups, and I found that there are some things in sales, while there's developments in the market, developments in technology, there are certain fundamental things that just don't change. And the trainings that I've been talking about and that we'll work on looking at here today, They very much capture a lot of those factors. So I kind of look at this as sales, oftentimes we fall into this sort of same old song and dance. We have customers in one ear, always telling us our prices are too high. We want to lower your price. Everyone wants to drive you into the basement in terms of dollars. You've also got them questioning what you're proposing. Do we really need that? Can we change this? It's second guessing the expertise, the solution that you're offering them. And then my personal least favorite is just silence. You engage with a customer, you give them what they're asking you for, and then you sit back and wait. You try to reach them, calls don't get returned, emails go without response, and then you find out eventually what their decision was. So how do we break through that? Especially while we've got our manager sitting in our other ear saying, hey, are you gonna make your numbers this month? Are we actually making money? So even though we're closing deals, are we actually doing so profitably, renegotiating well? And if we don't win something, why did that happen? So trying to balance that of being responsible to our organization and keeping engaged with our customers, and that can feel like a revolving door, like you're just stuck in it going round and round. So I've got some bad news and some good news on this front. The bad news is it's not that easy to change the nature of this game. Our customers are oftentimes the drivers of the market and what we have to adapt to. But in that adaptation, the good news is we can change how we play the game of selling and engaging with customers to better improve and to improve our outcomes and improve our incomes, of course, in sales as well. So outcomes and results goal setting, that's the first thing I want to talk to you all about today. The idea here is that we can run and run and run and be bringing dollars to the door and be making record sales every month, but if we don't know our long-term vision in terms of our strategy for what are we really trying to achieve with that as an organization, and in terms of how salespeople will play into that, it's really tough to know when you've arrived, when you've succeeded, and what you're doing with that. So if you don't know where you're trying to go, how are you going to get there? And if you don't know where you're trying to go, how will you know when you get there? So that book I mentioned, The One Thing, has a technique for managing that process. They call it goal setting to the now. And this is something that can be applied to sales quotas that we'll take a look at. But the general idea is you can use this in virtually any kind of goal you're trying to set in personal life, professional life, sales specifically. So the idea here is when we're looking forward, when we're saying, okay, I've got a goal, I've got a number, I've got something I want to achieve down the track, there's all these different paths to getting there. But if we start from the end and look back, hindsight's 20/20. So if we kind of simulate that, we start at the end and look back and say, well, where would I have to have been before to have gotten there? We get some clarity. I'm going to use a far out there example to start with, just because I think it really illustrates the power of this technique, and then we'll apply this to sales next. So as an example, you want to set a someday goal. That's typically how goal setting to the now works. You set a someday, you say, I want to do something ambitious. I'm not going to put a date to that necessarily. So the example I want to use is someday I want to eradicate malaria, Zika, all the mosquito-borne illnesses. And I'm using a real-life example. You'll find out who's in a second. So that's my someday goal. And I say, well, let's say right now I'm a college-age kid, as example. If that's what I want to do someday, how do I get there? That's so far away. That's such a big, ambitious goal. And that's the kinds of goals we want to set for ourselves and our organizations. So that's what I want to achieve someday. Well, what about 30 years from now? What would I have to be 30 years from now to be on track to solve that? So what if I founded a global philanthropy employing the top scientific minds to solve that problem? If I did that in 30 years, would I be on track to one day reach my big, ambitious goal? Most likely, that'd be a good stepping stone. To start up that foundation then, if that's where I'm trying to get in 30 years, well, in 15 years, maybe I should become a billionaire. That might be a pretty good way to fund this kind of an endeavor, which I know I'm doing this kind of high level. There are little sub-steps as well, but general concepts here at this point. I mean, that sounds good to me. I'm planning 10 years, but 15 is doable too. So if I want to be a billionaire in 15, in 5 years, well, what's a good way to make a lot of money? These days, start a software company in Silicon Valley. So launch a world-changing software organization. That might be a great way to become a billionaire, which in turn feeds into my goal. So if I'm sitting here now in college, what should I do? I should probably learn something about computer programming if I'm going to start a software company. So in this capacity, what we've now done, we've backtracked from a super ambitious, big, almost impossible sounding goal, and we brought it to today. Now, any guesses in the room as to whose path this actually is? This is a real life. And don't say me, because that would be crazy. I heard Bill Gates. Awesome. So that's exactly who this is. So somebody who's achieved great things. And I'm not saying he sat down one day and said, this is exactly what I want to do. But the point that this illustrates is looking backward from a goal is a great way to find the stepping stones to get you there. So we'll apply this to sales next, and we'll do this in a much more compressed timeline. Let's say that my end-of-year goal is to close $1 million in new business. That's where I've got to be. And I'm sitting on January 1st with nothing going on right now. And maybe I'm a new sales rep. Maybe I have no book of business going for me right now. So if I look forward, I see, well, I could try this, I could try that. I don't really necessarily know one sure way to get there, but let's go backward. I know that at Q3, if I'm on track numbers-wise, I need 750K in closed business, just simple math. And I also need to have some things in the pipeline, so I say, well, I'm going to set a goal then of having 10 high probability bids in the pipeline for Q4. I might also say, well, I don't want to be in this boat next year sitting here with nothing going on, so why don't I start laying a foundation in Q3 for Q1 and beyond of the following year? That then becomes a goal. That's starting to go near term in my goal setting. So now we go back to Q2. Halfway through the year, $500,000 makes sense. Some deals in the pipeline for Q3, starting the pipeline up for Q4 as well, depending again on your cycle, so you might stretch or compress this accordingly. And then I might also identify other opportunities. I say, well, if I want to get out there and be exposed to my industry and make sure that I've got a good pipeline going, there's a conference in Q2 that I should really attend. So I'm going to put that in my schedule as a goal. I want to attend that and present, have a booth, do something like that for Q2. So if I'm going to be on track for that, then we'll back up to Q1, quarter of the way through the year, $250,000. Again, the numbers make sense. Pipeline building up. And I'm also setting some behaviors, which will be the next section we get into. I'm saying, well, I've got to make 20 calls a day as an example. In some businesses, it's about getting calls out the door. That tends to drive numbers. I might say I got to get 10 bids out a week, but I start setting some metrics to this as we get closer to the present day, or to the now that we're setting our goal to. And also, I've got to do some research on that trade show or other exposure that I want to try to build in later in my goals that I've set, for example, for Q2. So I'm sitting right now with none of this in motion. I need to strategize. I need to think about what actions I've taken, or my mentors have taken, or my competitors have taken. I've got to look out there and say, what things get the results I'm going for? What things put me on this path? What things distract from this path? Because there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of other opportunities. But once I've done this, I can say, does this opportunity actually align with my strategy, with my goal? And then perhaps most importantly, what can I control? Because I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of you throughout the year, calling you about what we do and everything, and everybody's busy all the time. Same with us. Everybody's always busy. But so when we talk about doing a change, for example, implementing a new system, a new process like this, it's oftentimes the response to this, and I do this as well, it's like, well, when have I got time for that? But what we look at is there something in our control? Is there some domino we can knock down that sets things in motion? So the book I'd mentioned that this is from, The One Thing, the title comes from their focusing question, they call it. What is the one thing I can do that's such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? So we look for something that's in our control. We might say, well, I could totally deliver these sales numbers if I had 5 more sales reps. Well, I may not be able to hire 5 more sales reps. So what's something I can control? Starting with that, we begin to get the ball rolling. And so that's what we'll talk about next, because what that does is that lends itself to predictability. We've said we have a goal, we have a path we want to try to follow to get there, but how do we actually make this predictive and sort of guarantee that we're following that and that we're doing a good job of that? And it'd be so nice to be able to do that, because then that guarantees sales success. The problem with it is that we can't predict or control the future. I mean, we can take our best guess, we can try to forecast, we can use data, but ultimately we don't control the future. And yet, sales is all about prediction. It's all about goal setting. It's all about being asked constantly, what should the goal be? Setting goals, if you're at that part of your organization. Are you making quota? Are you going to make quota? Well, depending on what's going on, you might not know just yet unless you're already there potentially. And of course, deal to deal, will you win that contract? Being able to predict that sometimes can be a challenge too. So how do we build that predictability in our behaviors? And the answer is habits. The answer is making our actions and our processes predictable. And if we know the results that those tend to deliver, that builds predictability into our path as well. So I like this quote, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. People do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. It's the actions we take. We want to choose the actions that make sense along that path. So what we're doing is we're building a process that is very repeatable, and we start with identifying the actions that we need to take to deliver results. And we look at real life. We look at historicals. We say, what have we done in the past? When we've done a really good job, when we've really hit our numbers, when we've won those big contracts we've been looking for, what did we do? We go back and do what's oftentimes called a postmortem, after the fact, take a review of it and say, what are the steps we took? What worked? What didn't? We want to repeat what works and diminish what doesn't. And if we're not already doing it, let's say we're a brand new company or brand new to sales, well, we look around. We find mentors. We look at what our competitors are doing. We come to conferences like this one, interact with people and learn what works and what doesn't. So that could be successful bid techniques. How many of you are familiar with the 80-20 rule? Anybody ever hear that? That 80% of your results tend to come from 20% of your actions. So there's a certain subset of what you do every day that tends to drive most of your outcomes. So focusing on those things. It may be formulaic. In some businesses, you're able to say, well, we've seen that when our guys get 30 calls out a day, or they put out so many bids a week, that tends to lead to the number of dollars we're looking for, to at least a number we can build from. And then, of course, in the terms of the book that some of this comes from, that one thing, that thing you say, I can set something in motion with this first step. So we identify the actions that tend to lead to our outcomes. And most of us, I'd say, have an idea of some of those. The key then, the step that we often miss, is building habits out of this and building systems around it. So it typically takes 66 days to build a new habit, less if it tends to involve cigarettes or alcohol. That's usually pretty easy, but when it comes to stuff that benefits us, it tends to take a little more time, a little more commitment. So we want to be consistent. We want to perform these actions daily if we can. And even if we just time block, and this is where your calendar is so important, you block 5 minutes a day for doing that important thing that you want to do, that begins to build a habit, and that time will grow as the benefits of it grow. So you create a habit, you then take that habit and you build a system around it. And that can be software or technology, but it doesn't have to be. It can be paper checklists. It can simply be an agreed upon process in your organization where everybody's on the same page about what actions that we're taking. Technology does certainly help. Reminders on your phone, the calendar, that's what I live and die by, is time blocking things on my calendar to make sure I get them done, because the day goes by way too quickly. And so once we've built these systems and put them into place, we can begin to monitor the results. We can see our outcomes aligning. That process we went through, goal setting to now a few minutes ago, that isn't just a fire and forget. Every step along the way, we're auditing. We're quarter by quarter, year by year, we're sitting back and saying, how are we tracking to that someday goal, or that 5-year plan, or whatever it is that we've put in place? So we monitor it, we iterate, we improve, we revisit, refine our actions, and build new habits accordingly. The secret to this as well is not to take on too much at once. You might pick, again, one thing, that's why it's called that, to build a habit around, benefit from that, and then implement the next thing. Take change on in small bites. You don't have to innovate all at once. When you do this, the process is sometimes referred to as moving from being entrepreneurial to purposeful. You're going from kind of bootstrapping and going and you're just jumping around the organization, doing whatever you have to do. In the sales side of things, you're just reacting so often. You're oftentimes not able to sit and strategize. You're now moving with a purpose. You're saying, I have a goal in mind, I have a vision for where I'm going to get to, I've set out a plan, I've identified actions, and now I'm moving forward with a purpose. It also allows you to scale. People can gather around a purpose. They can't gather around reaction, but a system, a process, a goal. People can rally around that and work together. So if you've done that, you've set some goals, you've established some actions that make sense for you, and again, tying it back into sales, this is typically going to be how you structure your sales calls, your presentations, that sort of thing. There's another big variable here, and that's the customer. So when you're trying to figure out what leads to success and what is it that leads to failure so I can avoid it, you can work on your own systems and processes all you want, but the people on the other side of the table are a critical point of that, of course. So I like to think about when we interact with our customers, when we do deals, we are oftentimes we're handshaking. At the end of a visit or the end of a meeting, I don't walk outside the building and hug the sign in front of the company. In front of the building, I'm shaking hands. I'm looking people in the eye. And what we're doing there, we're honoring that we don't sell to companies, we sell to people. And the people are absolutely what matter. And I think we all know that at a fundamental level. But we can take it a step further in something of a scientific process to get to know the people involved, so that we can position ourselves to succeed, and also to understand when we don't, because that's so critical to be able to look back and say what went wrong so we can avoid that in the future, in selling as well as in other parts of your organization. So the Miller-Heiman group that I mentioned earlier that had the couple books, Conceptual Selling and Strategic Selling, they've taken an interesting kind of turn to the concept of decision makers. So oftentimes in sales organizations, we talk about decision makers. Have you contacted the decision maker? Do we have access to them? Do we know what options they're looking at? The fact is, everyone involved in the sale on your side and the customers is a decision maker. They all have some kind of influence, from the reception who decides to put your call through and say, oh yeah, sure, they're here just a moment, to know they're out at lunch, all the way through to the person signing the PO. Everybody's got their own involvement in this process. So Miller-Heiman gets rid of decision makers and goes in favor of what are called buying influences. And it's a good way to start classifying the different interactions you have throughout the sales process, to start to help you understand what each of these groups really is after. So the first one that they have is the economic buying influence. And this is the person ultimately signing a PO, signing your check. But what's important to understand is not just that role, but what they're looking to get out of a typical purchase. So typically in economic buying influence, they're looking for how what you're doing for them ultimately helps their organization succeed. And keeping in mind that their vision for what their organization is trying to do may actually differ from the others you're interacting with, that they have their own goals, their own agendas. So that's an important distinction. The next one they have is a user buying influence. And so these are the people that you're impacting directly with the scaffolds you're putting up, with the access solutions you're putting into place, whether they're going to be actively on the scaffold, for example, or whether they're going to be just directly impacted by the outcomes of the service you're offering. So these are typically your superintendents, project managers, and so forth. We then have got the technical buying influence. So these are the people that typically are going to say no to stuff. So engineers, health and safety, they're there looking for disqualifiers, or they're looking from a regulatory perspective, a technical in terms of compliance to a fundamental set of rules that are very important to them. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have what's called the coach. The coach is your person on the inside of your customer's organization, someone you've established a rapport with, someone you can talk to about the dynamics within their organization. Talking about these 4 different groups could take hours. There's a ton of detail here, but if there's one that we want to focus on today with the time that we've got, it's going to be the coach, because the coach significantly improves your chances of winning. Depending on the survey you look at, anywhere between 15 and 30% of salespeople, or deals rather, succeed when a coach is involved. And a coach is someone you identify that you cultivate. So I'm sure all of you are probably thinking of, in different organizations, different customers you work with, you think, okay, I've got that person that I know real well, we play golf together, we go out for a drink every once in a while, and those are great things for building rapport, for laying a foundation. But the important thing to find out is what really matters to them. Because when it comes down to the line, when they're in the room with the economic buying influence and they're reviewing bids and they're seeing a price difference between them, that person may not be willing to fight for you because you talk sports. However, if they see a win for them personally, and then this is true of all the buying influences, they're going to be more likely to fight for what you've put forward versus a competitor. So what you have to find out is what really matters to them. Are they trying to advance their career? Are they looking to get good marks in that way? Are they looking for a bonus that's tied to your performance, directly or indirectly, on the project? Or are they just tired of getting phone calls because they've been having issues with scaffold contractors in the past? They're looking for a better way of life or quality of life. So when we focus on what's in it for them, we can develop win-win selling, which I'm probably sure we've all used that term at one point, the concept of win-win, but it's something that we really have to invest in and really put a lot of effort in, because what that results in is repeat business from customers. Your reputation improves, so more people come into you, and ultimately increased profitability because you're able to work more as partners than as a vendor and a customer. You're able to sit down and really work through what's in it for both of you, how you can both perform and succeed together. So in order to do that, you have to understand what's in it for those customers, for each of those roles and each of those people that's involved in the deal. And the coach is your guide. So once you've cultivated, or once you've developed the coach, you're able to sit that person down and say, hey, this person's going to be responsible, first of all, understanding who's actually signing the PO, fundamentally, and then finding out more about that person. What are they looking for specifically? What matters to them? And I think as salespeople, we often assume it's price, it's dollars. When we dig deeper, when we really dig in, and we look at what matters to them, oftentimes we find out that that's not necessarily the case. And so once you find out what it is that matters to them, you can focus on that. You can sell on the basis of that important thing. So that moves us into what is it that customers buy from us? What do they truly want? So in the example of scaffolding, are they looking for a building wrapped up in scaffolding? Are they looking for a nice, shiny new office block that they can start selling units or renting units out of? What's the ultimate deliverable for them? And why, in their minds, are they talking to you about scaffolding? So when you focus on why, when you get into what is it that's truly bringing them to you, and you make that part of how you present yourself, you're able to frame everything that you do in the sales process around them. You're truly customer-centric. You're barely talking about you at all. You're asking questions, and you're putting everything right back into their terminology and into their world. So in marketing and copywriting, there's a test called the so what test. It's also very useful for sales messaging, whether it's what you're speaking to somebody with, whether it's what you're writing up in a proposal. And you apply the so what test to find out if what your message is actually speaks to the why that's important to the customer. So we're going to try this out on my new product, which is very much fictional. So I'm going to introduce to you Ali Scaff, which is my new scaffolding equipment. Completely fictional, please don't get me wrong on that. I'm not trying to jump into that market. So I want you to pretend for a moment that you're not a scaffolding expert, that you are effectively your customer, Put yourselves in their shoes. You're a general contractor, you're an EPC, you're an owner or operator, you're sitting there wanting to find a solution, but you don't know the ins and outs of scaffolding, let's say. And I'm going to pitch you on the AliScaf product. So first off, I might lead off with something technical. I'm saying it's made of the most cutting-edge space-age materials. It's green as well. We recycle beer cans. We've got this crazy adamantium alloy, and it's pure magic. It's just wonderful material. And this you can apply to aluminum, hot-dip galvanized, whatever term you want to use. Something technical, something really material-driven. In the scaffolding industry, we can start deriving information from that. But your customer is going to sit there and go, well, so what? What does that mean to me? So we say, okay, well, what that means is that it's the lightest, strongest scaffolding ever made. And again, the real-life experts in the room here are going to go, okay, well, that's useful to me. But your customer, once again, is like, well, I don't necessarily care to really use that information. So what? So we go one step further. We say, well, it's way easier to carry into site. We can put it up way faster, and we can use far fewer pieces. So now we're starting to get somewhere, but can we do better? If we ask, so what? We might arrive at something more useful still. So in your customer's world, well, if you are contractors using my equipment, you're going to see more competitive bids, and you're going to have a lot less delay time waiting for access availability and waiting for it to be removed from site. So now we've arrived at something that probably aligns more closely with what the customer really cares about. So any messaging, marketing, any of that you do when you sit down with your customer and tell them why you're there with them, what you're offering them, it's important to kind of go through it in your head and think, well, is what I'm saying actually aligned with the conversations that are happening when my customer goes away and deals with what matters to them in their world every single day? Is there a way for me to align what I'm saying and what I'm positioning myself with to line up with what really matters to them? There's a trick with this, though. We can always go one step too far. So if we say, so what, to that last statement, we arrive at something that every salesperson on the planet, especially every bad salesperson, leads with. I'm going to save you time and money. Has anyone ever had a salesperson not tell them, I'm going to save you time and money? Right? Everybody does that. Everything that's the fundamentals of value. It's too generic. It doesn't speak to me in a way that I say, oh, you get me. So anything beyond scaffold could save me time and money in this scenario. It may not be the right solution, though. So when we go through that process, when we align our messaging and our positioning, our why, if you will, to what matters to the customer, what's in it for them, something really great happens. We begin to shift away from being a commodity. You go away from being something that can just be put two bids next to each other, there's the dollar figure, well, lower price wins. That's commoditization, because we're assuming those two are the same thing. And that's what we have to break out of when we're talking about things like safety and quality and efficiency. Those have got to be connected to the KPIs, the performance indicators that matter to your customer. When you do that, they're now no longer able to just compare on dollars, because they say, okay, well, yeah, this one's cheaper, but I don't know if they really understand what we're trying to achieve here. I don't know if they're actually going to deliver on what matters to us upstream, because a difference of $5,000 is one thing, but a lost week at the job site could make all the difference. There could be millions. So tying that value together is so important. And when you do that, you become more than a vendor. You're now a partner with them. You're sitting out with them saying, I'm here to help you succeed at what you do. I'm not just here to sell you equipment or sell you erection services. I'm here to make sure that you're taken care of. And I can not only, it's not just a fluff statement at that point, because I'm speaking your language, I'm speaking about what matters to you. So that means that others are out there running around, they're again competing on the commodity level, they're pushing price, and you're sitting there saying, well, we're going to engage in something a bit more meaningful, we're going to make sure that you get what you need, that your delays are down, that the important things to you are what we're going to deliver on. And so your odds of winning when you're doing that, when you're putting together a well thought out solution for them, your odds go up so much more. And so that really ties into what's become my mantra. Don't sell, help. Every step of the way, you want to be useful, helpful, more than just salesy. And that's because very rarely, if ever, does a customer want what you are selling. And I'll say this in the business I'm in. How many people want software versus wanting enablement? How many people want a scaffold versus want a finished project? They have an opportunity, or they have a threat they perceive, and they want help capturing that opportunity, or they want help avoiding that threat or that danger. That's what they need from you. That's what they need from anyone they're buying anything from. So when you demonstrate that you understand that need, and every opportunity, every interaction you have, you show that and you find ways of helping, even if it's not tied directly to the deal itself, the bid itself, you make yourself indispensable. You become a part of their team, and if nothing else, it's a great way to get them to pick up and return your calls. So to kind of close this out, in the sales business, it's very easy to get jaded or to get fixed in place. There's always going to be people out there who are manipulative or difficult to deal with or shady, all that. That's just a universal truth of all business. So in sales, rather than feeling like we get stuck in that revolving door, we have to look for ways to innovate, ways to change our process to improve our quality of life and to improve the quality of lives of our customers and the way that we service them. And so in doing that, we develop good habits, we develop systems and processes that drive forward an objective, a clear vision that we've set out. And as long as we demonstrate then value as well, we tie what we're doing to what matters to our customers, you will go further in the long run. That's what puts you in the lead in the market. And that's sort of the carrot of this, doing better and improving things, but keep in mind there's also the stick, there's also the downside of this, which is that if we're not innovating, if we're not constantly looking for better ways of doing what we do, somebody else is. And that may be an emergent company, that may be an existing competitor, that may be a new generation coming to the industry that's thinking about things a different way. And that's going to be the millennials, the M word, but I'm going to leave that one to Cameron Boots in his presentation next. So that's what I had for you today. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but I'm happy to open the floor to questions or anything on your mind. Yeah, I'm tired too. All right, we'll call it a day on that. So that's my info. Call me if you need me. Thanks, everybody.